My name is Nolan Hoyer. I'm the student ministries pastor and small groups pastor here at The Point. And it's great to be here. It really is. And I love serving people here at the church. It's a privilege. In the few short months that I've been here since September, I've met some of the most wonderful people. I haven't known you very long, but there's example after example after example of people in this church who have opened up their lives and stepped up and to be there for me and my family personally. And I'm the pastor, and you're ministering to me. That says a lot. And so we're blessed to be here. My family's blessed to be here to serve you and also become family with you. I just wanted to say that. Now, Pastor Greg, last week, he spoke about Jericho and how ridiculous it was to walk around that city 7 times. But if they had stopped short, they wouldn't have seen God's blessings. If they thought that, things just aren't working out, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't make any sense. And they stopped short, they wouldn't have seen the walls of Jericho fall. They wouldn't have seen all those things that God wanted to do happen in their lives. So what's the point? The point was, don't stop. Just about all of us are in situations where we need to hear, don't stop. Don't become weary in doing good. You've gone too far in your marriage to let it fall apart. You've gone too far in your walk with God to go back to the way that you used to live. You've survived financial stress for a very long time, and God has never let you be stretched beyond what you can bear. Don't stop. The book of Hebrews was written to people who needed to hear, don't stop. So we're not alone. I'm not alone in needing to hear that, and you're not alone in needing to hear that. Hebrews 10:36 says this: you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. If we do stop and we say, this isn't working out for me, I can see how things are going and they're not going where I want. What is listening to God? What is doing things God's way done for me? If we go down that path, we're going to miss out. We really are. You've gotten through a lot of the hard stuff. Hang in there. Make it count. Don't be that person that gets a gym membership on New Year's and then quits on January 2nd because they didn't lose 10 pounds or because they didn't run that 6-minute mile. Don't be that person. The kind of people that we want to be are the people that have the guts and the faith to not just start something, but to also the guts and the faith and the endurance to finish something. Let's be those people. Let's be those people who don't talk about with our mouths about what we should do and don't ever do it. Let's be those people that do it. I'm going to talk to you about something that happened to Paul the Apostle. He was stretched, but he didn't stop. God was faithful to what He promised. Paul went through pain and trials, and he was tested to the core. If there's anybody that went through a lot, it was Paul. And whenever I'm feeling like I'm going through a lot of trial, I just need to read through 2 Corinthians 11, and I see, okay, things could be worse, And in this story, too, that I'm going to be talking about today, same thing. But Paul wrote a good portion of the New Testament. And what he shared was undoubtedly shaped, formed, molded, and matured by all the experiences that he had, all that adversity that he faced. If you see a believer that has this great spiritual depth, the chances are that they've gone through some very deep personal trials that have helped get them there. So in this story, Paul is in a trial. He's in transition, and he's in trouble. And if any of you have been in transition or trouble, or you're in transition or trouble now, it's not a bad place to be in. We think it's a bad place to be in. We do everything we can to not be there, but it's not a bad place to be in. Because transition and trouble, that's the place where God, a lot of times, that's that place where He makes transformation happen. That's the place where He works in your heart. That's the place where you are fertile ground for breakthrough. So if you're in transition and trouble, then cheer up. It's a good place to be in. So Paul, about transition and trouble, think about it. If you're comfortable, right? Do you want to do something to be uncomfortable? No. Okay, so let's take an example to maybe understand a little bit more. Let's say someone takes comfort in eating chocolate, but they have diabetes. Bad situation to be in, right? Maybe a little discomfort with, maybe if chocolate was discomforting to them, or if it didn't taste so good, maybe that would help them to be healthier, right? So when we're in, my point is, when we're in, maybe we want comfort, but maybe we need a little discomfort to get us to the place that we need to be for God to do some work in our hearts. So comfort might not be that. It might be the discomfort that helps you get there. In transition and trouble, Paul was in both of them in this story. He's on a ship and he's headed for Rome, so he's in transition. And Rome doesn't sound so bad. We think about that, yeah, a cruise, but he wasn't on a cruise. And he wasn't going there to hit all the finest restaurants and eat there. He wasn't going there to check out the exotic animals at the Colosseum. He was going to Rome as a prisoner. He probably has chains on his hands and feet. He was a Roman citizen, so he could have been worse off, but he's still a prisoner on a boat that's headed for trial, for where he's going to be tried in court. And he's with 275 other people on that boat, and he probably, and he encounters this unexpected difficulty that wasn't his fault. You might be thinking, yeah, I can sympathize with that. I have an unexpected difficulty that's not my fault that I'm going through right now. Well, here we go. We're going to start in Acts 27, verse 9. And this was written by Luke, who was on the ship. We know that Luke was there because he starts all of a sudden saying, we this and we that. And so we get to hear the story from someone who is on the trip. I just think that is really cool. So that guy was there. So let's dig into that. Let's hear that. Let's hear this. Much time had been lost, and sailing had become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. So Paul believes that they're going to wreck. And so he talks to the guy who's in charge. But the centurion doesn't listen. He listens to the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Well, yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Put yourself in his shoes. I'm here, I'm in charge of transporting prisoners, and I got the pilot and the owner of the ship, and I got this prisoner over here, prisoner preacher. Should I listen to the pilot and owner of the ship or the prisoner preacher? Okay, and then you start thinking about questions. Well, who has been trained to sail a ship on these waters? Okay. Who is concerned about the boat? Who's concerned about this property not getting wrecked? Okay. Should I trust a prisoner? I mean, well, for all I know, maybe he doesn't want to get to where he's going, you know? So he doesn't make a bad decision based off of worldly wisdom. But Paul, he does have experience. Back to 2 Corinthians 11, he had been in a shipwreck 3 times already. And so he could see it coming. And he also I'm thinking that he saw what the decisions that were being made. Because if we go back earlier in the chapter, we see that there was difficulty going over here, difficulty going over there. The winds were against us, and the pilot and the owner of the ship, they just keep trudging forward. And Paul's like, I've seen this before. I don't want it to happen. He remembers that day that he was in the open sea. He floated around in the open sea for a whole day and a night. That was terrifying to think about. So I'm thinking Paul's thinking about that, and he doesn't want to do that again. So he speaks up. He asks the centurion, he tells the centurion, I can see where this is going. Don't go here. Just stay. But the centurion doesn't listen to him. Paul wasn't on the boat for just any reason. He was on the boat fulfilling God's plan and his purpose. If the centurion had insight from God, maybe he would have seen that. Maybe he would have seen that Paul had insight from God. Maybe he would have made a different decision. Oh, and if you stop to think about it, Paul was like God's voice in this situation. It's like God saying, hey, I know this doesn't make sense, but you got to stay because going is just going to be a disaster. And so he listens to the pilot and the owner instead. And it's kind of like us sometimes, isn't it? We listen to all the other voices except for God. You know, especially when God says something that doesn't make sense to us. We listen to our family, we listen to our friends, we listen to all sorts of people about it. But what about God? Do we hear God's voice? Do we listen to God? You might want to write this down. Will I steer by my sense, or will I steer by the Spirit? Every ship is being steered by something. And just like your life is being steered by something. The ship is your life. And the direction that you're headed. So your life and everything that God's given you, it's all headed in a direction, and it's being steered some way to go. And a lot of us, when we're in that situation, we make decisions like the centurion. We don't listen to the voice of God because it doesn't make sense to us. When we listen to our senses because we can wrap our minds around it and we can predict it, we think we can predict it. Well, the centurion predicted wrong, didn't he? And God tells people, and we think about the Bible, God tells people to do things that don't make sense a lot in the Bible. Maybe it doesn't make sense at first, or maybe even it doesn't make sense for a long time. But if you want to be a person who has a strong faith, then you can't only decide that you're going to do something when God tells you if it makes sense. You can't put it through that filter. It didn't make sense to walk around. Do I need to switch? Okay. It didn't make sense to walk around the walls of Jericho 7 times. And it didn't make sense for Moses to expect that the seas, the waters would part when he struck the staff into the water. It didn't make sense for Daniel to spend a night in the lion's den and expect that God was going to rescue him or save him somehow, protect him somehow. And it didn't make sense for the creator of all that exists, who doesn't owe anything to anybody, to come down here, become one of us, and serve us like a slave, and then be executed by being nailed to a cross after being flogged and paraded through the streets. That didn't make sense. And it didn't make sense for Jesus to say, "Forgive them, for they know not what they're doing," to the people who are doing those things to him. And it didn't make sense for him to rise up out of the grave and appear before hundreds of people who can verify it. And it didn't make sense for the disciples afterward to keep on talking about Jesus and saying, "Jesus did this, Jesus did that," when they were going to be killed for it. That didn't make sense. Are you living your life by what makes sense? Or are you living your life by faith? So if you stop every single time someone says, "You know what, the way that you follow Jesus, you're taking him so seriously, it's weird." If you stop every time that you hear that, or if you stop every time it hurts, what kind of a faith is that? Listen to this. Outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is yours. Let me say that again. Outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is yours. Doesn't that take a load off? You don't have to understand in order to obey God. You don't need to know where it's going in order to take the next step. In this passage, we see some people who were on a ship and they should have stopped. Yeah, I know this sermon series is called Don't Stop, but in this situation, they should have stopped. And they went along, they were caught by a wind, and it looked like everything was going to be okay. And then in verse 13 we read on. It says, "When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long," not too much time, huh? "Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along." They were supposed to head into the wind to get to where they were supposed to go. And if you look up at this map up here, you're going to see an arrow pointing at Phoenix. Let's see if this works. I'm pointing at myself. There we go. I hope I didn't blind anybody. All right, so you can barely see it, but there's Phoenix there. They were over here at Fair Havens on the same island of Crete, and they're supposed to go this little tiny distance there to get to Phoenix, just a little bit left there. What did they end up doing? They ended up following this line all the way over here to Malta, just by mainland into Italy. That's how far they were supposed to go. So they couldn't get there. No matter what they were doing, they couldn't head into the wind. They're fighting against this hurricane force wind. So they turn around and they just let the wind take them. Maybe they were even going backwards when they were trying to go forward there to get to Phoenix. Sometimes our lives feel like that. We decide to just, you know what, I'm not moving anywhere. I just got to go somewhere. I got to do something. And so we turn and let the wind just take us. And we feel like we're going somewhere. We're really moving. We're going somewhere, but we're not going where we wanted to go. Feels like you're making progress, but you're actually headed for disaster. Jesus said, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? What good is it if you give your child the best present for Christmas that they could ever ask for, but you hardly have a relationship with them? What good is it if you get all the credit and you look really good, but you had to hurt people to get there? What good is it if you have money, but you abandon your character to get it? What good is it? It seems like you're moving forward, but you're going the wrong way. The winds are just against you, and you're being dragged along some other direction. The people in that boat, they weren't in control anymore. They were just being driven along. Some of you might feel like that, being driven along. Life is happening to you instead of you living out your life. They're just going with the flow, letting things happen as they come. And then in verse 16 and 17, it says this, "As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Cyprus. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along." There we go again. There's that driven along, being driven along. I wonder how many people find themselves being driven along because they ignored God's voice. If you find yourself there, though, don't get down. Get up. And learn from it. Do whatever you have to keep that boat together. Throw ropes underneath it. Tie those ropes together. Figure out a way to keep above that water. The ship that Paul was on didn't get driven along forever. It didn't. It eventually got to where it was ultimately supposed to go. They were going to Rome. And God told Paul he would go to Rome too, earlier on in Acts. So Paul had that promise. And he eventually made it. If you're being driven along in your life, look out for God's voice. But don't repeat those mistakes of the past. Don't repeat those mistakes. But if you did, get up. It's not too late. Come to God. Think about the thief on the cross. So Jesus is being crucified. There's thief on the right, left. And I don't know what kind of life he lived, but I do know that he was being crucified, and it was for something that he did. There was a reason for it. He was guilty. So maybe, who knows what his whole life was like before that. But then when he's on the cross, he meets Jesus. And he asks Jesus about paradise and can you welcome me in and everything. And Jesus says yes. He welcomes him in. So if you think it's too late, it's not too late. Jesus will welcome you in too. He will accept you. So let's see what happens next. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Okay, we've tied the ship together, but that's not enough. We need to start throwing things overboard because the water is coming up and we got to throw something over. So they start throwing some of the cargo over. That's not enough. Now the situation got worse and worse. Now we're in a situation where we got to decide what ship gear is essential and what's not. What do we throw off? What do we keep? In normal circumstances, you don't throw off the ship tackle. But in this desperate situation, they did it with their own hands. When bad things get worse, they start finding out what's essential and what's not. They still didn't lose anyone's life. Hard decisions have to be made, and life is messy sometimes. If they just continued to be driven along without throwing out the cargo, maybe they would have sunk, and they would have been in open sea, and sharks, whatever's there drowning. You can't swim forever. Hopefully that piece of wood floats and keeps on going. No land in sight. You can't be just driven along and leave it at that. Even if you're in that situation, sometimes there's things that you can do to improve it. There's your attitude, whatever it is. Your values change. Things that you used to take for granted are now luxuries that you can't afford. Like the tackle on the boat. You look at yourself and you think about what's important. So what is important? We need Jesus. We need Jesus so much. And people are more important than stuff. The people stay on the boat. Jesus stays on the boat, metaphorically speaking. Verse 20. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. We have to have reached the bottom by now. There is no hope. You notice that it said we lost all hope? Paul and Luke were there too. They lost hope. They reached that point where they could see their breaking point. They were there. They had been stretched, and they reached the point that they lost all hope that they would be rescued. I can't see the stars. I don't even know where I am. I'm in the darkness. The storm has been raging for many days. I stopped counting. We're going to die out here. We threw things overboard before, but I don't even see a point in throwing anything else overboard. It's over. They were at that place where people are when they say, I'm always going to be alone. Where they say, I'm not going to try to look for a job anymore. Where they say, I'm never going to make you happy. I'm just being driven along anyway. That's where they were. They lost their hope and they lost their guide. They were in darkness. The stars at least told them where they were going, let them orient themselves. But now they don't even have that. What's the guiding star in your storm? Jesus. Is Jesus that guiding star? He can show us that hope, a hope that can pierce through the clouds of darkness. Jesus can do that. He really can. So when you're in the storm, when you're in the middle of the sea, and things didn't happen how you wanted them to happen, you're about to give up. You're about to stop. What should you do? Don't stop. Don't stop in the middle of the storm. Keep going. When you think that there's no reason for hope, don't stop. In this situation where they lost all hope after this huge ordeal, what do you think's going to happen? Well, after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. In this hopeless situation where things just got worse and worse and worse, Paul stands up and he says, I told you so. I don't know about you, but I think that's hilarious. I'm reading through it, and I think that what he's going to say is this uplifting thing that's going to lift their spirits, give them courage, help them get through. He's going to give them hope. And he says, I told you so. But he doesn't just leave it at that, though. Nobody wants to hear I told you so and end it at that. He doesn't leave it there. After he makes sure that they remembered what he said, he gives them a but now. So here comes that hopeful message that we were waiting for. Here it comes. But now. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. But now. I know that there's just water around you, and all that you can see is just destruction, hopelessness. But now. I can't see the stars. I can't see the end of the storm. I can't see the ground. But now is the time for courage. It's not time to lose what's essential. Nobody has time for hopelessness. It's time to listen to that voice of God. And the voice of God is going to speak. No one is going to die. Just the boat. It's not going to make it. But you will still live. You will be alive. Not one of you will be lost. God cares. Some of you need to hear that. You might be suffering and hurting and hopeless, but God cares about you. Jesus' name means Yahweh saves. We worship a God who rescues. Do tough things happen? Yes. Does God care? Yes. Is God there for you? Yes. Now, I think that they would have preferred to have had the boat and their lives, but I'm betting that their perspective changed. I'm betting they were glad they got out of that storm alive. What's essential? I thought that I would be farther along by now, but I'm just scraping by. I thought that job was going to work out. I thought that they would forgive me. I thought that I would make it into that university. I thought that this, I thought that. Yes. Maybe things didn't turn out the way that you thought they would. But the ship is worth nothing compared to the passengers. If we read on, we find out that no one was lost, but the ship was wrecked, just like Paul said. And bear with me, we're wrapping up here. God said that Paul would make it to Rome, and he made it to Rome. God revealed that Paul wouldn't lose anyone on the ship, and there was nobody lost on the ship. And Paul had to the centurion had to intervene there, because the soldiers were about to kill them, but then he spared them on account of Paul. But that came to pass. And God said that, through Paul, that the boat wouldn't make it, the ship wouldn't make it, and it didn't make it. God has a plan. God has a plan. And He knows what He's doing. He's in control, even if we're not. And God, when things get worse and worse and worse, God can make something beautiful come out of the ugliest of situations. He turned the cross into salvation. That's who He is. That's the kind of God we serve. The fiercest of fires can forge the greatest of swords. A life filled with trouble can come out a masterpiece when it's in God's hands. So keep up your courage and don't be so focused on the boat that you don't follow what God's doing. Plans that don't work come and go. If it's the Lord's will, you will do this or that, this year or that year. Leave room for God's voice. And don't be afraid when the fires and the storms surround you. Because with God's direction, the fires and storms can forge the greatest of faiths. Don't stop. Amen.